Teaching American History, a look at the city of brotherly love. Follow in the footsteps of our country's forefathers with a group of history teachers from the Florida Panhandle as they take an up-close and personal look at the historic events, people, and places that have shaped our nation. The city of Philadelphia was the first stop on a three-city tour, Teaching American History, to raise student achievement by improving teachers' knowledge, understanding, and skills in teaching American history.
See you guys again, a whole bunch of fifth graders or elementary kids. Enjoy your time in Philly.
Thanks, Junior.
One thing I'd like for our teachers to be able to see and experience is the different historical sites in Philadelphia, and we're excited about the possibilities that's going to be afforded everybody. And then in New York, we're really looking forward to the Ground Zero experience. We're not exactly sure what to expect there, but hopefully it'll be something that we'll remember the rest of our lives. We're excited about communicating back with our students and the districts, and so it's just going to be a good experience. And then in Boston, we really want to see the historical points of interest there, and so everybody's had a good flight up, and we're just on a high right now, a historical high, you'd say.
Do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
And will, to the best of my ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend
preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And that I will, to the best of my ability,
And that I will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend
preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
this great nation will endure, as it has endured, will revive and prosper. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Signers Hall is the end of our exhibit here at the National Constitution Center. It contains life-size figures of the 42 men who were present when the Constitution was signed. 38 of those men signed in person. One of them, John Dickinson, was ill and asked a fellow Delawarean, George Reed, to sign for him. And then we have our 3 dissenters, Mason, Jerry, and Randolph, who decided that they did not want their signatures on this document because it did not have a Bill of Rights. Without a Bill of Rights, they considered this a flawed document and decided that they would not care to sign it. A company in Brooklyn called Studio EIS created these statues. They did a year-and-a-half of research using family records, diaries, portraits to create these statues. They actually made body casts of actors that had the same general proportions as the delegates. They had other sculptors create the heads and the hands, and then they were all put together to create the gentleman that you see here today.
The person we're talking about when you guys arrived is our most famous patron, Dr. Benjamin Franklin. These are the original stones. The only thing that's been added and it's been different is they've been raised, and this part was added in the 50s. And you can see it was cracked a little bit when it was raised. But raising it helps to preserve it. It helps with the weathering a lot. And the epitaph you see here is the epitaph that he chose. This is what he wrote in his will. This is what he wanted in his will. He originally wrote a comical epitaph when he was 22 years old. You can see it over there. It was never intended to be used. But in the end, this is what he wanted. And why do you suppose that is? Why do you think that he didn't want a big long epitaph like you see all over the burial ground? But with Benjamin Franklin, we suppose that maybe he felt that his life was also speaking for itself, that he didn't have to say anymore. But that's just a supposition on our part. We don't really know. But we know in the end, he was a little bit quiet. When throughout his life, he was a big self-promoter. We have 4,000 people who are buried in the burial ground. We know all the people who are buried here from the church records, but we don't know what all the inscriptions say on all the markers. It wasn't until 1864 that all the inscriptions were written down. And now that they're written down, we've got them all, and we replaced quite a few of the markers when we knew what they said. And if you look around here, you'll see the inscriptions. This is Franklin's family plot. He's buried with his wife, Deborah, his daughter, Sarah, Richard, her husband, and we just redid these here. We know what these markers used to say, so we just recently replaced them. It's John Reed, that's the father of Sarah. I'm sorry, forgive me, that's the father of Deborah. Sarah was his wife, she's here too, but we don't know what her marker read. We did John's. Francis is the son of Benjamin and Deborah. He died when he was 4 years old. He used to have a marker that read what you see here, so we replaced that. And the only other Franklin that we know of that the marker used to exist and isn't here any longer is Emma Mary Bache. She died when she was 10 years old, and she's the great-granddaughter of Benjamin and Deborah. Now, Benjamin had another son. It wasn't through Deborah. Does anybody know who that is? William. Very good. William, he was the royal governor of New Jersey, and that was a particular problem in 1776. So he and Benjamin didn't get along very well. William went to jail in Connecticut for a while, and then he left and went to England, and he's buried there. But surrounding us are all of the children of Sarah and Richard, with the exception of Richard Bache. He's buried in Texas. But they go unmarked. We don't know what their inscriptions used to say. And some of the grandchildren are here. The rest of the Baches are over on this side. And Benjamin Franklin's also buried with his partner. David Hall is over here behind the bench. And that inscription's been redone. You can tell because you can read it very well. We have a lot of signers. Signers of the Declaration of Independence and signers of the Constitution that are buried here. And the reason for that is, well, I should say that Christ Church was like our national cathedral. We didn't have a national cathedral, but this is the closest thing we had to it. The rector for Christ Church was the chaplain to the Continental Congress, which of course led to the Declaration of Independence. So all the delegates, all 56 delegates were affiliated with the church. If not religiously, they were affiliated politically and socially. And in addition to that, the rector from the church was also the chaplain to the Constitutional Convention. So all 55 delegates from the Constitution were again affiliated with the church. So if somebody happened to pass away while they were in Philadelphia, chances are they're going to be buried here at Christ Church. And that's why we have so many signers. And our second signer along the way is this gentleman here, Francis Hopkinson. Francis Hopkinson was a signer from New Jersey. And he was also the organist at Christ Church. He was a jurist, which meant he was a lawyer and a composer. And he's also an artist, and he's attributed to designing our American flag. And we do have the letters going back and forth talking about his design. And there's another person who was affiliated with the flag. Who was the other person who's affiliated with the flag? Betsy Ross, right. Now we don't have the written evidence that Betsy Ross sold the first flag that Francis Hopkinson designed, but there is a connection, and the connection is buried right here, and he's right on the other side. George Ross is our connection between Betsy Ross and Francis Hopkinson, and he's our third signer on our tour here, and he's a delegate from Pennsylvania. He's the uncle to Betsy Ross by marriage. John Ross was Betsy's husband, and George Ross was his uncle. And the story goes that George Ross brought Betsy the design to be sewn. And it does make sense, there's connections. Be careful, sir. Thank you. And there are connections. If you go to Christ Church and you see the seating chart, we know where everybody sat because they rented their pews. But you'll see Francis Hopkinson had one pew. Across the way was George Washington, and then the other side of the big pillar was Betsy Ross. So they had to have known each other. And Betsy Ross was a seamstress, and she did sew suits for Benjamin Franklin. So her name was known, although her name was not a famous name at the time at all. And her sewing the flag came to us in about the 1870s, almost 100 years later. Her husband is buried here, but we don't know where. George Ross, this marker is not the original marker. It doesn't look very original, does it? We don't know where he's buried, but we do know he was here, and this is put in the 50s or the 60s. Also, Francis Hopkinson's marker over there, his marker's been lost through time as well. That was also put in the 60s, but his marker's put in right next to his daughter, so we're pretty sure he's very close to where his new marker is.
The area that we're in right now is known as State House Yard, because it's the yard behind the Pennsylvania State House. The Pennsylvania State House is this building right here. Construction started on this building in 1732, the same year George Washington was born. And it was the State House for the colony of Pennsylvania. That's where the Pennsylvania Assembly met. Today, of course, it's known as Independence Hall. So it is considered by most historians to be the most historic building in the United States of America. This brick building over here is the American Philosophical Society, the oldest learned organization in America. Now, what Philadelphia citizen of the 18th century do you think founded the American Philosophical Society? No? Oldest learned society. Nope, who's the man that, the genius, the man who was into everything? Benjamin Franklin, correct. The American Philosophical Society is still in existence today. It's limited to about 500 members. The way you get to be a member of the Philosophical Society is by invitation only. It's by attrition. When someone passes on and a seat becomes available, then you're invited to join. They meet here twice a year. One of the members, current members, who I understood, I was told last time I did a tour in the Philosophical Society, that former President Jimmy Carter was a member at that time. So I'm assuming that he still is, because once a member, you're always a member until you pass away. Over the time, very many people, famous people, have been members of the Philosophical Society. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, you had Louis Pasteur, Thomas Edison. Very prestigious to be asked to be a member of the American Philosophical Society.
To get into the room, you see in the painting here on the wall, it's the assembly room. It's where the Declaration was signed. And, you know, that's what I'm going to be talking about on the tours, what happened in that room. That's the birthplace of the country. Everything in the early history of the country, anyway, takes place in that room. Originally, it was for the assembly, the legislature for the colony, held their meetings in that room. That's the reason it was constructed to begin with. 1732, they began work on the building. Just about all the brickwork outside's original. The only thing that's not original is the bell tower. The original tower was in such bad condition that they had to rip it down, 1781. They were actually afraid to ring the bell. You know, if ring the bell, the whole thing's going to come crashing down. The wood was that rotten. So the tower we have now is old enough. It's from 1828. That was the city's attempt to get back to the original look of the block, put up a new tower. So it's old, but not original. So that's the major difference in the building, reconstruction of that tower. And that was the city's attempt to get back to the original look, what it did when independence was declared. So everything happens in that room, though. I mean, the assembly met there, but then they let the Second Congress use that room. That's where George Washington was made the commander of the Army. Army, Navy, Marine Corps can all trace their beginnings to that room. That's where they started out, created by the Congress. It's where George Washington gets the job of being the general of the Army, in that room. So lots of history in that one little room. This painting shows the other major event that took place there. It shows the signing of the U.S. Constitution. Now, the Declaration gets top billing, right? The building becomes known as Independence Hall. In the 1820s, they start using that name, as far as we can tell. That's when that name comes into use. And at first, it's just the room. The assembly room becomes known as Independence Hall. As they got closer to the 50th anniversary of independence, you know, then they begin to realize what happened in that room is worth remembering. Okay, folks, I'd like to welcome you to Independence Hall. This was the State House for the colony. Governor had his office upstairs, the legislature across the hall from us, and this the courtroom, English courtroom. People could come in and stand right where you are to watch the trials take place in this room. That's the reason for the archways behind you. Now, it made it easy to get people in, and it helped guarantee the person on trial a fair trial. No secret trials taking place. People could always see what's going on here. Way they worked it, first the grand jury would meet, and they'd use the two big boxes on either side of us. Grand jury's job, like today, to decide whether the government has a good case, whether the person should even be put on trial to begin with. If they said yes, then bring in the petit jury, and they'd sit over there in that corner, now deciding guilt or innocence. And then you have the court reporter, the attorneys at the round table, bailiff, witness box, judge or judges up on the bench. So not much different than a modern American courtroom. Everything you need to hold a trial we have in this room, plus something extra. This thing, right? This is called the prisoner's dock. It's where the person on trial would be standing. This is where you'd be if you were on trial in the 18th century, standing trial. Innocent until proven guilty, but this is where you would be. After the Revolution, we did away with docks. You don't see these things in modern American courtrooms today, but they still use that term docket, and they still say standing trial. So not everybody supported independence, though. You know, there were things people liked about England. John Adams had it broke down. He broke it down this way. He said that 1/3 of the people for independence, 1/3 were for the king, and 1/3 didn't care. They were tried to stay neutral. And a lot of historians agree that Adams was probably right, or close to being right anyway, with the way he broke it down. A lot of ways it was a civil war between Americans shooting at Americans in some places. Like there was one battle down south near the border of North and South Carolina, Kings Mountain, big battle. Only one British soldier took part in that battle. Everybody else Americans. And that's not the only place it happened. It broke up families, broke up the Franklin family. You know, Ben supports independence. His son William remained loyal to the king. William was the royal governor of New Jersey time the revolution started, and he remained loyal. So loyal that he gets, you know, he's causing so much trouble for the Patriots, they throw him in jail. Ben received word about that, and Ben, well, his reply, I don't know the exact words, but pretty much worked out to be, I'm not going to do anything for William, and he never did. Eventually, William did get out of jail, ended up living in England. I mean, today we remember Ben Franklin. 300 years after his birth, we still remember Ben. William is pretty much forgotten. We don't even know where William's buried. He's that forgotten. Now, both sides paid a price for what they believed in. Loyalist or patriot, both sides paid a price. And if at least they're on the winning side, if you're a patriot. Loyalists, a lot of those people lost everything they owned. Their land, their property, families. One group of people that did agree across the hall in the assembly room, that's where we'll head next, folks. That's where the Second Congress met and declared independence, and that's where we can head right. Get a look at that room. Pretty much what it looked like when the Second Congress met here. The fighting had gone on for over a year. It's not until May or June of 1775 that the Congress appoints a committee to direct the, come up with the signing of the Right to Declaration. I mean, Thomas Jefferson got the job of writing it in June 1776. 5 men on the committee, but he does all the writing. Took him about 2 weeks to draft it. Years later, when he talked about doing that, he said he had been trying to get to the common sense of the subject. He called it an expression of the American mind. And finally, Independence Day, July 2nd. At least that's what John Adams called it. July 2nd, he felt we would celebrate because that was the day the Congress voted to make the break with England, voted on independence. Then they debate the Declaration, they argue over the wording of it, and finally agreed to that on the 4th of July. So that's the thing that happened on the 4th. They agreed to the wording they all could live with. And that night they had it printed. This is what the Declaration looked like when it first came out. This is called a broadside. This is what the Declaration looked like to most people living back then. The fastest way to get out news, have it printed, send it out to the different towns and cities. To most people living back then, this is what the Declaration looked like. The very famous and gross Declaration, the one that starred with Nicolas Cage in that movie, National Treasure, that was not ready yet. That was not ready until August. August 2nd is the day they pledged their lives and fortunes, sacred honor, when they agreed to that. To most people, this is what the Declaration looked like. The room was used again for a convention, 1787. This is where the Constitutional Convention met. We did have, they revised the Articles, that's what they were here, revised the Articles of Confederation, a league of friendship among the states. Under the Articles, Congress had very little authority. The Congress was more like a United Nations, really, not like the Congress we have today. The states did not have to listen to Congress. If they didn't want to do it, they just ignored Congress. The states considered themselves separate countries in this league of friendship. Congress did not have the right to tax. That was too much power. The states keep that for themselves. That system got them through the war. In peace, no need to cooperate. By 1787, it looked like the League of Friendship was going to break up. So they agreed to come back to revise the Articles. Instead, they end up creating a new constitution here. 4 months arguing about how much power they wanted to give the new government, how much power to give to the President and the Congress. They argued over things like how to pick out the President they argued about. Some of the men wanted the governors of the states to decide who the President should be. Others wanted the Congress to vote and pick out the President. They argued about how many presidents to have. There were some men that wanted it done by committee. A couple of these men wanted it done by 3, have 3 men, 1 from each region of the country. Now, that way, their logic being you avoid jealousy, and you avoid the chance of one man setting himself up as a king. or a dictator. They argue how many representatives each state should have. They argue whether the people should be allowed to vote for their congressman. Roger Sherman of Connecticut says, no, you cannot trust the people. They lack knowledge and are easily misled. They should not be able to vote. James Wilson of Pennsylvania said they should. He said that the force and the sense of the people should be represented. They should have a say. Not everybody agreed. There were men that got up, walked out, and never came back. Now, felt this Constitution was giving too much power to the central government and taking too much away from the states. George Washington, though, said after this meeting was over, he thought it was little short of a miracle that they agreed. Now, so many different opinions, ideas. It kind of surprised him, I guess, that they did agree. He had a good spot to see and hear everything going on. He sat right up here. This is the chair he used at the convention. The actual chair. A lot of the other things we have in the room are from the period, but this chair is original. The very last day of the meeting, Ben Franklin talked about the carving at the top of the chair. That's the thing that Ben talks about. Said he'd been looking at it all during the convention, but it gave him a problem, he said. He said, I'm trying to decide whether that sun was rising or setting. Now, at length, I have the happiness to know that that sun is a rising and not a setting sun. His way of saying that a new nation was being born right here in this room. Everybody has their own take about the revolution, what it was all about, what people were fighting for, what they expected to get out of it, all sorts of different opinions about it. Abraham Lincoln gave his opinion right here in this room. George Washington's birthday, 1861, he was here in Philadelphia. He was on his way to become president, take his oath. He stopped off here. He took part in a flag-raising ceremony right in front of the building, right near the statue of Washington. There's a little plaque where Mr. Lincoln stood to take part in that ceremony. Then he came in this room. While he's here in this room, he said it wasn't the mere separation of the colonies from the motherland, but something in that declaration giving liberty, not alone to the people of this country, but hope to the world for all future time. It was that which gave promise that in due time the weight should be lifted from the shoulders of all men, and that all should have an equal chance.
Here. And then in 1791, they passed legislation to locate the capital to where it is now, Washington, D.C., to neutral territory where they would build it up from scratch, and also nobody lived there. It would be where they would work, like they would commute in. That's why, you know, Washington, D.C. is pretty small. They didn't know people lived there. It didn't work out exactly the way they planned. But where we are now is where Congress was. This is the oldest Capitol building in the United States. It is original. This is where the House of Representatives was. You are going to be also going upstairs with me to see the Senate. Now, the furniture, I have to tell you, it's reproduction where you are. Because if it was the original, everybody would be getting up. Even though you had a long day, it make you get up. But what's original is the big chair for the Speaker of the House. That is original, and this darker color wood desk here, that they'd have a law enforcement person. I mean, when you have people talking about politics, I mean, I don't like to say it, but you do need a law enforcement person sometimes. So that's original. This is a reproduction desk where a clerk would be, who would take attendance. Now, just for your information, to give you something to work, you know, and like go on to imagine, they left Philadelphia with 106 members in the House of Representatives. Now, here's my question for the group. I don't know where everybody's from, but does anybody here know, I hope somebody, how many members we have in the House of Representatives today? 435. Excellent, 435. So it looks like this in Washington, D.C. It's just way bigger. You're invited today in Washington, D.C. They have a balcony. And if you have cable, I don't have cable TV, but if you do, turn on C-SPAN. You'll see them meeting if they're in session. But here, there's the balcony right over you on this end here. So the public was invited to the sessions here. There were no assigned seats. It was, first come, first serve. You know how it is today? It's by seniority. How are they going to judge it, though? By seniority. I mean, it's a new country. So you had to come here early to get a particular desk or chair. Now, my job is to tell you the most important things, because you could go on forever. I mean, they were here 10 years. One important thing is the country got bigger. 3 territories became states. Vermont, Kentucky, and Tennessee were added as states. So they left with 16 states, and the new states were taken on as equals. I mean, they were given the same rights and privileges as the original 13. So we're getting bigger. Next thing, and I have a question for you. The second President of the United States was inaugurated here. Does anybody here know who the second president was? You got it, John Adams. Now, he had a very good resume. I mean, he signed the Declaration of Independence. He was the first vice president for 8 years. But he finally becomes second president, and I'm going to tell you how he does it. Because George Washington doesn't run. Now, today, you can only run to be president twice. You can't, run more than twice. There's an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, but there are endless possibilities for George Washington. And he doesn't look in the mirror and say, look, I'm making $25,000 a year, because let me tell you, that's what he was making. People love me. Why should I leave? I'm President of the United States. This is not his attitude. He says, George, I don't want to be a king. I'm not supposed to be a king. I'm not going to be a dictator. I want to live to see someone else become President of the United States. So he doesn't run, and it is one close election. John Adams receives 71 electoral college votes, and Mr. Thomas Jefferson received 68. So you know what that meant? He was the vice president. If you came in second to be president, I mean, you'd have a job, you'd be vice president. But stop. Don't just accept that. Think about all the combinations you would have as president, vice president, and it wouldn't work out so good. The reason they did that is they wanted the minority to be heard. So what happens is they change it because of what happens here. Political parties start to develop. They realize if you vote together as a group, you're going to get legislation passed. So in 1804, that's when they start running on political party tickets. So this is never seen before. One elected leader stepping down, another one coming in. So they made the inauguration for Adams, John Adams, very quick. It was no more than 20 minutes. What do you think about that? I don't think we'll be seeing an inauguration like that anymore. You know why they did that? If you're worried about someone's reaction to something, you better make it go very quickly, over and done with before they can think about it. So that's what they did here. March 4th, 1797, George Washington walked in the doors that you came in as president, and then out, as a private citizen. And they were inaugurated right here on the side.
First off, I want to cover this because this tends to be the most asked question that I get working here. This is the real bell. This is not a fake. This is not a replica. This is not something we haul out just for you folks. This is the real Liberty Bell. It's remade actually right here in the city of Philadelphia in the year 1753. It says it right on it, and it was remade by these gentlemen, John Pass and John Stowe. The reason they had to remake it was because the colony of Pennsylvania had originally ordered a brand new state-of-the-art bell from Whitechapel Foundry over in London, England. The bell that arrived here in this country, they test rang it, and it cracks almost immediately. Needless to say, Pennsylvania was quite angry. They thought they were getting, as I said, a brand new state-of-the-art bell. So they were quite perplexed. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? They were in the process of getting a new bell when John Pass and John Stowe offered to see what they could do. They were going to try and fix the bell. Pass and Stowe did not normally make bells. There was no place in the 13 colonies at the time that made something like bells. They normally made smaller metal objects, pots, pans, things like that. They gave it a try. They decided what they could do. They took a mold of the original bell and melted it all down. Reused most of that metal to try a second bell. They tried that bell out, and the sound they were getting from it was just bad. It was horrible. It was not what they really wanted. So they had them do it again. They melted the bell down, redid it, and came up with the bell you see here. So it's not technically the original bell. It's the third bell, but it is the original Liberty Bell. The bell would have hung basically right where you see that bell up there nowadays. And the bell rang on numerous occasions. Everything from the call in the legislature to office, important events, when the King George II died and we had the new king, King George III, they rang the bell out. It was a hard-working bell for many, many, many years. That is up until the time of about 1846. That is where we get into the crack, because everybody comes here wanting to know the crack, the crack. They always want the picture in front of the crack. Well, I might be disappointing some of you, but this little item right here is not a crack. This is a man-made attempt to fix a crack. If you want to see what a crack looks like in a bell, that's right here. There was originally a crack that would have run right down the middle of this large gap area here. When that actually occurred, your guess is as good as ours. We simply don't know. We can narrow it down to a time period of roughly between 1817 and 1846, but when the crack actually occurred, we simply don't know. We have no newspaper accounts, no letters that we can authenticate to prove when the crack occurred. We do know that if you try to ring a bell in a crack, you destroy the sound of it. You get almost like a buzzing noise, and it cracks further. The reason being, metal. If you ring the bell, it vibrates up and down, back and forth, wrecking the sound of it and causing the crack to get worse. There are two ways you can repair bells. First way, Pass and Stowe tried when they melted it down and reformed the bell you see here. The second way is called stop drilling, which you actually drill into the bell. If you look at it, you can almost see the grooves in it from the drill going all the way down. The reason being, with a crack, if you widen it and then try to ring it, the metal no longer vibrates up and down, so hopefully you restore some of the sound of the bell, and hopefully it doesn't crack any further. It's a theory and it normally works. In this case, it did not, because they did the repair job in January. The very next month, February of 1846, they decided to ring it in honor of our first president, who was Washington. Okay, I wanted to make sure you were still following me along. They started ringing the bell off. They were planning on ringing it for the entire day. In this case, it lasted roughly about 3 hours when the crack reappears. And it goes all the way up here. And it's not just a surface crack, it does go all the way through to the other side. So you could literally stick your head up and follow it along. This retires the bell as an active communication device. There is no way to really repair this bell short of melting it all down and starting all over again. Now that's the crack. Now on to the name. Why is it called the Liberty Bell? It was not originally meant to be called the Liberty Bell. It had no intention of ever being called the Liberty Bell when it was first ordered. It was for the Pennsylvania State House. That building back there, we better know, is Independence Hall. The bell didn't actually get its nickname, the Liberty Bell, until a good 80 years or so after it was created. In the mid-1830s, abolitionist groups coming here to the city of Philadelphia for meetings went to time to go see a minor tourist attraction, then known as the Old State House Bell or the Independence Bell. It got that nickname because of the mistaken belief that it rang out on July 4th, 1776. Now they went up to, bell at the time was roughly right about where that brick part in the tower was. And they went and they inspected the bell and they started reading the inscription. For those of you who don't know the primary inscription, proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It's a verse from the Bible. They were reading this inscription, and if you think about what an abolitionist, an anti-slavery group was trying to accomplish back then, if you really think about the inscription, it really does tend to make sense for them. They are the first ones to use the bell as a symbol of something, and they are the first ones to use the bell and to refer to the bell as the Liberty Bell. The name kind of stuck from that point on. It continued to grow as a symbol in the post-Civil War era during the Reconstruction phase, and during the 1880s and 1890s when the bell actually made trips outside the city of Philadelphia, visiting such cities as Boston, Chicago, St. Louis, San Francisco. In the 1900s, the 20th century, for the women's suffrage movement, they used the bell as a symbol. During the civil rights movement, it continued to grow as a symbol, and as a continuous symbol, it is still a symbol to this day. That is primarily it. The only last things I do like to cover a couple of the constant questions I tend to get working up here at the Liberty Bell. First off, the bell that's up there now, that big bell up there, that is the Centennial Bell. It was made in 1876 for the 100th anniversary. It's considerably larger. Some people like to think that's a replica. It's not. It's about 6 times, it's more than 6 times as big as this bell. Liberty Bell weighs 2,080 pounds. Centennial Bell is, well, I'm going to quiz you folks here. It's 1,000 pounds for each of the original colonies. So how big is the bell? 13,000 pounds, okay. Yeah, a bell does ring every hour on the hour, and the last little thing I get a lot of questions about are the wood. What you see up here is, as far as we can tell, original. It's been tested and dated to the time period. It's Native American elm. It was found in the basement of Independence Hall. When they mounted the bell, it fit like a glove. And the reason it kind of looks off is, it's my understanding, in the 1930s they treated it with creosote to help prevent rotting. So that is my little brief history of the Liberty Bell. Hopefully you learned a little something. Hopefully you're going to enjoy the rest of your day here in the city of Philadelphia. I thank you for coming, and hopefully you have a nice day.
This is the Robert Morris statue, patriot, statesman, financier. He was one of the wealthiest men in North America in the 18th century, and he helped pay for the American Revolution. He used some of his own resources. He also held fundraisers and had some of his wealthy friends also contribute to the war cause. But he was also a member of the Continental Congress. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. However, after the American Revolution, he made some bad investments, and he went bankrupt. And he was actually in debtor's prison. Debtor's prison was the Walnut Street prison, which was right over there across the street, pretty much almost behind where he is now, a little over to the right. That's where the Walnut Street prison stood. And during the time that Robert Morris was in the Walnut Street prison was the same time Philadelphia was the capital of the United States and George Washington was our first president. So George Washington comes here, and we have to have a nice home to give our first president of the United States. Now, whose home do you think Washington was living in? Robert Morris's home. When he went bankrupt, he had to sell off all his assets. So while Robert Morris is back here in the Walnut Street prison, George and Martha Washington were living in his former home just a few blocks away. Eventually, he did gain his release from prison. However, he never did regain his fortunes. So when he died, he was buried in a potter's field. However, Christ Church, Philadelphia, which is down at 2nd and Market Street, felt that he deserved a place of honor, and so therefore he now rests in their burial ground in the small churchyard adjacent to the church. Okay, this building behind us is known as Carpenter's Hall. It is one of our most beautiful buildings in the park. It is not owned by the Park Service. It is owned by the Carpenters Company, the oldest building organization in America. In the 18th century, Philadelphia was a growing city, so master carpenters and bricklayers and stonemasons came here to find work. By 1724, they decided to form an organization called the Carpenters Company, and their purpose was to provide instruction to people who wanted to go into architecture and the building trades, and to also to provide assistance to members who might have been injured on the job and their families. Okay? They would meet in private homes up until 1770, when their membership grew and they decided to build a meeting hall. So they built this hall here. Robert Smith, who was a member of the Carpenters Company, was the architect who designed the building. Construction started in 1770, completed in 1774. Just in time to play a very important role in our American history, because this is where the first Continental Congress met. September of 1775, the British have closed Boston's harbor. They have quartered troops in their homes. The other colonies decide it's time we get together to have a discussion about how we're going to handle this. So they decide to meet right here in Philadelphia. 6 colonies above us, 6 colonies below us, so it's a nice central location. All of the colonies except Georgia send delegates to the First Continental Congress. They met inside this building for about 6 weeks, starting in September of 1775. Their purpose was not to declare war. Their purpose was to try to come up with some sort of a reconciliation. They weren't ready to take that step yet, though there were some members at the time who were ready to take that step. But what they did in the 6 weeks that they met here, they wrote a petition to the king listing all of their grievances. They adjourned, and they said, we will come back here in May of 1775. It's difficult to travel over the roads in the 18th century, so they all wanted to get back home. That would give the king the time that he needed to look at the petition, decide how he was going to respond. So when they agreed to come back here in May of 1775, at that time they were not aware of the fact that by the time they arrived back here, the first battle of the American Revolution will have been fought. So when they come back here in May, Lexington and Concord had already been fought the previous month. So at this point in time, they do have a war on their hands. Now, when they come back to Philadelphia in May of 1775, they call themselves the Second Continental Congress. And they do not use Carpenter's Hall as their meeting spot. Instead, they use the Pennsylvania State House. You were there yesterday, which today is known as Independence Hall. A few things about the building. It is a fine example of Georgian architecture. If you look at the building balance, that's one of the elements of Georgian architecture. Everything on one side has to be matched perfectly on the other side, and you can see that quite clearly in this building. It's also built in the shape of a cross. And when you move back out of the court, you can see a beautiful cupola on top. Now, I also want to point out something interesting we get a lot of questions about are the fire marks. If you look at the second story, in between the windows, there's plaques on the wall. Does everybody see them? They're known as fire marks. They're an advertisement for the fire insurance company, okay? Now, the first plaque that you see right here, does everyone see that? It's 4 hands clasped together, right up there. That is the contribution ship. 1752, Benjamin Franklin started first fire insurance company here in the city of Philadelphia, known as the contribution ship, still in existence today. So they choose as their logo or advertisement clasped hands, so it's nicknamed the Hand in Hand. Okay, but the contribution ship does not insure houses with trees around it. So another insurance company decides to open up to give Ben Franklin's a little bit of competition, and they're called the Mutual Assurance Company. And they will insure a house with trees around it. Of course, you're going to have to pay a higher premium for that. So what they choose for their logo is a tree. And that is nicknamed the green tree. So the first fire mark you see is the contribution ship, the Hand in Hand. The second one is the Mutual Assurance, known as the green tree. Now, it's important to have a fire mark prominently displayed on your house in the 18th century because the volunteer fire company would be reimbursed by the fire insurance company if they got there first to put out the fire. So there are stories that there were actually street fights as the two volunteer fire companies would converge on the scene at the same time, both of which wanting to be able to put out the fire so they could get paid and reimbursed by the insurance companies. Okay, so you will see them throughout the city. The third one that you see over here, that's actually a symbol for the Fire Association of Philadelphia, which is the fire mark for the Philadelphia Fire Company, which is actually run by the city today. We don't have volunteer fires within the city limits today. Over here quickly, before we move on, this building right over here is a reproduction of New Hall. The Carpenters Company also started to rent this building out for income. And it was so busy that they needed to build a new meeting hall for themselves, so they built this building right over here, which was known as New Hall. It was torn down. This is a reproduction built by the Park Service, and it's a military museum. That's what the Park Service has in there today. This building over here is the back of it, so when we go around to the front, you might want to get pictures of the front. That's a reproduction of Pemberton House. Joseph Pemberton was a wealthy wine merchant here during the 18th century. His house was also torn down, but the Park Service rebuilt this so that the court would look pretty much the way it did during the time of the First Continental Congress. Okay, this area is known as Franklin Court. This is where Benjamin Franklin built his home. He already owned some land here, plus also some of the land he inherited from the Reed family. He was married to Deborah Reed. Okay? Now, when he decides to build this house, He's already retired from printing. He is a member of the Pennsylvania Assembly at this time. It's in the early 1760s. About 1763 is when he and Deborah decide they want to build a larger home because they entertain more often. So they start the construction of the home, and right in the middle of the construction of the home, Benjamin Franklin was sent over to London by the Pennsylvania Assembly as an emissary to go over and talk to Parliament. So he leaves his wife Deborah in the middle of a construction project. Now, even though he is over in England, he's very interested in every aspect of the building of this house. It really is a collaboration between the two of them, and they constantly correspond back and forth. Deborah's letting him know what's going on. He's writing back with very specific instructions about how he wants things done. And when I'm done with this tour, you can actually come onto the slate floor and you'll see inscribed or carved into the slate excerpts of the letters that were exchanged between Ben and Deborah while this house was being built. The sad part of the story is that he ended up staying in London for 9 years. And during that time, Deborah suffered a stroke and she passed away. So when he came back to Philadelphia, he never actually got to share the house with his wife, Deborah, after they worked in it so closely together. But he did live in the house with his daughter, Sally, whose real name was Sarah, her husband, Richard Bache, and his grandchildren. Now, eventually, the Baches, after Ben Franklin dies, the Baches start to rent the property out. It goes into a decline, and eventually, in the early part of the 19th century, it was torn down. So what the Park Service has done here is extensive excavating, and you can look down in the holes in the ground and you will see some of the original foundations of the home. And they put up the steel outline, which they call the ghost structure, or the ghost house. So it gives you an idea of the size and dimensions of the house. And actually, Ben Franklin added on to the original structure when he came here. Need a little bit more room for his inventions and things, especially when he's living in the house with grandchildren and it was noisy. And in Ben Franklin's time, these buildings over here where I'm pointing weren't here. So the gable end of the house had a clear view right down to the Delaware River. So it was a nice location because it's right in the center of town, but it's back in a court, so it's very quiet and he has a lot of privacy. He also goes back to printing later in his life to teach his grandson, Benjamin Franklin Bache, the printing trade. And what we have up here is another steel outline, another ghost structure. That is where he built a print shop right here in the court for his grandson later in life.
So you saw that that's where that steel frame structure is where Benjamin Franklin's house was. It was torn down in 1812, okay? Franklin came to Philadelphia in 1732. He was 17 years old, and he got a job as a journeyman in a print shop. Not this print shop, okay? Eventually, he had his own print shop, and that would have been over at 2nd and Market Streets. That building no longer exists, but we try to do things here just the way they did in Franklin's day, okay? Now, one of the first things to do for printing would be to set the type. This is called a composing stick, all right? Now, if you want to come a little closer, to get a better look at it, in setting the type, they needed to take letter by letter. Okay, the letters are over in these cases. On the uppercase, they're the capital letters, and there's all little portions to be able to see it. Let me just give you a closer look, okay? All little compartments for the letters, okay? So as I mentioned, the large letters, the capital letters, would be in the upper cases, small letters in the lower cases. Uppercase, lowercase. Exactly. Okay? So, setting the type would be over in this area. They would take letter by letter, word by word, and line by line. And I want everybody to get a good look at this. It's upside down and backwards, so that it reads right side up. After the type was set and the form was in place, they were ready to do printing. Printing is a team effort, okay? The beater would take the ink beaters. Okay, so it's the wooden handles, there's wool underneath and leather, it's tacked all the way around. Okay, so next they need some ink. I'm just going to get some ink from the ink tray over here. Now, ink is made of 3 different ingredients: tree sap, linseed oil, and chimney soot. So you don't want to get any on you, you know. Franklin made his own ink, okay? But he made ink, but he used to sell it to his competitors. He purchased his ink from Holland. And we use Dutch ink also, okay? So I want to make sure that it's evenly distributed on the beaters. And then I want to apply the ink to the type. Again, I want to make sure that it is evenly distributed. Okay? The beater would step aside and the puller would pull a sheet of paper that had been moistened in water earlier. Okay, there's the bucket over here with the water. It's moistened in water earlier to open the pores. Because during the early days, ink was printed in the paper. So that if I would slide my hand across a paper from the early days, the ink would not come off on my fingers, okay? If I did that today, what happens? Sometimes the print comes off. Because today, ink is printed on the paper. During the early days, it was printed in the paper. Paper was made from recycled old clothes, okay? So old shirts, old socks, old aprons, whereas today, it's made from wood pulp. They didn't know how to do that back then. Now, I just want to put the paper in place, and I'm just going to turn this down, roll this under, and when I give this a pull, the block is being pressed up against the paper and the ink, all right? Hence, press, all right? And now, it's a large sheet. I want to make sure that I cover the entire sheet. So I'm just going to give this another pull. Now, Franklin, he was printing, he had his own newspaper, the Pennsylvania Gazette. It was a weekly newspaper. He printed pamphlets. In fact, he edited and published Poor Richard's Almanac, which had those witty sayings and practical wisdom that Franklin was known for. Like a penny earned is the penny. Exactly. In fact, it was a bestseller for over 25 years. It was first published in 1733. And like I said, it was a bestseller for over 25 years. The only thing that outsold it was the Bible. Okay, now I just want to roll this back and here we have the printed page, okay?
Did they print on the back of that page too, or just a one-sided thing?
Okay, depending on what was being printed. If they're printing on the other side, which at times they did. Can everybody see this okay?
Can we feel the paper?
Oh, well, it is moist. You can feel, but don't touch where the ink is. Okay, if they were doing two-sided, yes, they could. But the thing is, they would do the next side either the next day or a couple days after. Because let me just explain something first of all, I also wanted to mention, we're just printing something from Abigail Adams, a letter that she had written to her husband, John Adams, who was a delegate of the Second Continental Congress, and a meeting over at the State House building, what we now call Independence Hall. And she was indicating that in the new code of laws that they were going to be making up, they needed to remember the ladies. And then we also have his response, John Adams' response to Abigail. So that's what we're printing. And you know what? Remember the ladies, I think, is even good advice for today, okay? Now, because the paper is moist and the ink is sticky, it needs to dry. So, we just get the thing here, and we're going to put it on the racks to dry overnight. Actually, it only needs a couple of hours to dry. We allow it to dry overnight. And tomorrow we're going to gather all the papers from the racks. We'll put them in the other room. Eventually, they'll go under a cold press to get all the wrinkles out. Now, everything that you see here was printed on this press, and this is a reproduction of an 18th century printing press.
It's known as Alfred's Alley, and it is claims to be, or shall we say, we do have a question going on here, whether or not this truly is the oldest continuously occupied street in America, because the question has been raised that there's possibly a street in St. Augustine, Florida, that may have houses where people have lived more continuously. So therefore, I am pointing out the sign that Philadelphia claims to have the oldest continuously occupied street in America. However, it has been occupied for a pretty long time, okay? Jeremiah Elfreth was a blacksmith here in the city in the 18th century. He was one of the principal property owners down here on the street. That's why it is named after him. This is very typical of what a street would look like here in Philadelphia in the 18th century. We are a maritime city. Delaware River is only a block down that way, so a lot of the occupants who lived in the house in the 18th century were people, could have been a sea captain, could have been someone who worked along the river. We also had a lot of shopkeepers here in the alley in the 18th century. Furniture makers, pewter smiths, some bake shops probably were here in the alley during the 18th century, so it was very, very, very busy. Now, even though William Penn laid the city out to have very wide streets, this originally, they believe, was a cut-through to get through to properties that were down at the end of the street facing on Front Street. But as the city grows, they want to build, they have to build houses. The center of city is Second and Market. Everything's around the river, so they start cutting smaller streets through the wider streets, and that's how this developed. Okay, the first houses on here date to 1713. That's why we say they're continuously occupied since 713. However, the houses that are on the alley today, there are 33. They date from 1728 to 1836. They are all privately owned, except for two. One is operated by an association, and they do have a gift shop there. And then there's one that's set up to be a chair maker shop. So we're going to take a walk down the alley, and we're going to take a look at some of these houses and stop at a few on the way. Yeah, these two houses here, number 120 and 122, are the two oldest houses on the alley. So they date to 1728, and if you go back and look at them, I know the street's narrow, they mirror one another. They are exact copies of one another. And one of the things you'll see a lot in the houses in the 18th century are these busybodies. The second floor window, you see that wrought iron black arm coming out, and there's a series of mirrors. There's 3 mirrors on there, so they're known as the busybodies. So you can see who's at your front door. You can be a busybody and watch what's going on in the street. This is a busy street in the 18th century. A lot of shopkeepers, a lot of walking pedestrian traffic up and by, so you can see what's going on and nobody knows you're being observed. So that's why that's aptly named a busybody. So over here, number 25, 125, a full 4-story structure. This is federal architecture. You can tell the difference between the architecture in the 18th century and then into the 19th century. This is the newest house, 1836. And as I pointed out in Carpenter's Hall, you will see the busybodies. The street, you've seen the cobblestone or riverstone before. This one has slate on either side, which is good for wagon wheels. And it's also Ben Franklin's idea to light the streets, and he also designed the 4-sided lamppost. Prior to that, the lampposts were one large bowl that looked like a fish bowl. It was called a bowl. It was very hard to clean, and if it broke, you'd have to replace the whole thing. So Ben Franklin, always coming up with a practical idea, designed the four-sided lamppost. One side opens, it's easy to clean, and it's easy to replace the glass, one at a time, okay? We believe that Betsy Ross was the woman who sewed the first American flag, though there isn't any official documentation to support that claim. It was a story that was told by her grandson many years after her death when he wrote a paper to the Pennsylvania Historical Society. Her name was Elizabeth Griscom. She was a young Quaker woman who grew up here in Philadelphia. She married her first husband, John Ross. He was a non-Quaker. She was read at a Quaker meeting. He was killed in an explosion during the American Revolution, left her a young widow. But John Ross had an uncle named George Ross, who was a member of the Continental Congress. And when George Washington was looking for someone to sew the first flag, which had already been designed by Francis Hopkinson, we believe that George Ross suggested that he go to his niece, Betsy Ross. So we believe that's where the connection came in. Now, Betsy Ross, there is documentation that she did sew banners for naval ships, so flags for naval ships. So that's also another reason to believe that she may have sewn the first American flag. This is her house behind me now. Now, the story also goes that the original design of the flag, Francis Hopkinson's design, was for a six-pointed star. And you'll notice our flag today has a five-pointed star. The story goes that Betsy Ross, as a seamstress, knew how to take a square of fabric, fold it over a few times, and with one snip of her scissors, make a five-pointed star. So in her opinion, it was much easier to have a five-pointed star, so the story is that Francis Hopkinson agreed to the change in design. Now, she does marry her second husband, Captain Ashbourne. He also leaves her a widow, and then she marries her third husband, John Claypool. So she outlived all three of her husbands, ran her own business, and raised 5 daughters. Okay, it is believed that she lived in this house here. She really had an upholstery business more than a seamstress business. That's what her real business was. But nevertheless, she is a woman to be admired in the 18th century to have accomplished as much as she did. Okay?
My first impressions was the city itself, the architecture, and how detailed and old the city looked, and how I didn't realize how it was such an important and historical site. You know, just based on the architecture, looking at that. It would have to be the Constitutional Center, because that's where we actually started our tour, and we went through a presentation that involved a live actor, and then we went through an exhibit where we were able to work with some interactive activities. One activity actually had you where you could stand up, and the background was like if a president was being inaugurated, and you got to put yourself in that position and actually raise your hand, and the video looked like that the Supreme Court Justice was swearing you in as president. So it was really neat. It was very interactive, very hands-on. I wish we could have had some students there with us today. Amazing, old, and going through all of the historical sites that we visited today made me actually realize how, not as a history teacher, I realize the importance of the Constitution, but I'm more inclined to, you know, make sure that other people know that they know what happened here, and who's the historical sites and who was involved, and just to maybe kind of revive that in some of my co-workers along with my students. Benjamin Franklin obviously has been, you know, in history. He's a hero, and he's so many inventions, and he's just an important figure. And it was wonderful just to be there in that place and knowing how old all of the grave sites were, and what they, you know, who they were and what they meant, and that it's being preserved like it is.
I really enjoy Constitution Hall because I think it's something all our kids, I wish they could see, because I think they would enjoy the actor and the interactive things that we were able to do today. I was real impressed that they preserved all that, and I thought it was a beautiful city. I was really kind of surprised because, you know, when we went to Washington, we saw a lot of people that were homeless, and I didn't see that many today. And it was just a beautiful city. I really enjoyed it. Well, we looked at Ben Franklin's grave and his wife, and we looked at a lot of tombstones, and we talked about the person that made the inkwell for the signing of the Declaration, and we also looked at some graves where some young children died, and they talked about how yellow fever had been a contributing factor, that a lot of people had died from that until they figured out that it was coming from mosquitoes. I'm hoping to do a PowerPoint so my kids are more aware of it, and I hope that I'll go back and be able to explain the Constitution so they can understand it better, because it is an important document.